I think I mentioned earlier in another video the Split Britches group in New York with Peggy Shaw and Lois Weaver and Deborah Margolin. They worked toward producing a different production process, much more collaborative and much more focused on what does the performer want to say about his, or let me say her role, because they didn't want any guys involved with their shows. And it was a woman-centered kind of theater for women and built by women, and doing all kinds of experimental theater. Holly Hughes was a part of their group, and they would do, again, it was a kind of camp sensibility thing. Perspective. Holly Hughes wrote plays in which we had one play about a lady detective who's hunting down lesbian bad girls and lives in an environment in which all women are lesbian, and overturning of the normal way of looking at the world back in the 1980s certainly seemed fresh, and indeed if you encounter it today it's still quite disconcerting and often more than amusing. It can be quite engrossing when a different idea of normative prevails in relation to a story, a narrative, the environment in which a story takes place, and the way of performing it, and then who's performing it. Different norms prevailing, and these are the norms that the audience brings with them to the theater. And there was a point. Gay theater generally, but the lesbians, through Split Britches and other groups that sort of emulated them, made very effective, perhaps more effectively than any other group, because of the way in which sexuality itself is so normalized in our society, and indeed any society, along heterosexual and homosexual, male and female, and rules that are appropriate to each gender and each sexual orientation. But when those rules don't prevail, or rather one gender and one sexual orientation follow a different set of rules than the other, you get a different kind of theater. And all right, let me mention also Werner Fassbinder, primarily known as a movie maker from Germany, and he was extraordinarily productive. Probably died young in 1982 from overwork. Too many projects going on at the same time, and too swift a succession. He lived a very, very fast life. But he wrote several plays about homosexuality. Many of his films deal with it. I'll mention his play The Bitter Tears of Petal von Kant from 1972, which is quite a remarkable play about a masochistic relationship between a fashion designer and her assistant, and the games they play with each other. Sounds a little like Genet and The Maids, but not quite. Fassbinder introduces a class dimension between the aristocratic fashion designer and the assistant that you don't find so much in Genet, but from Fassbinder's perspective, is fundamental to understanding the power dynamic between people who are close to each other, work with each other, and desire each other, and even love each other in ways that might seem cruel. And that's one thing about Fassbinder that is recurrent in his work. way in which love manifests in cruel ways, and it's a dark emotion, and always operating within a sadomasochistic idea of communication between bodies, and major feature of Fassbinder's work is that, even more so than anybody else that I mentioned, he regards homosexuality as a norm. It's never a problem for those who are homosexual in Fassbinder's work. He doesn't rely on a camp sensibility, as Split Britches does, and Bush and Charles Ludlam, to create a different idea of normality. For Fassbinder, homosexuality is not the norm for all of humanity. He doesn't assume that it is. He just assumes it's normal for those who are homosexual. And he doesn't dramatize having homosexual desires as a problem for the characters or for the society in which they live. It's just not in Fassbinder's work, and in a way, he's unique in representing homosexuality like that. So that the plays are never about the problem of being a homosexual. They are about homosexuals who have a problem with each other that has to do with something else other than their homosexuality, such as the class distinction between the fashion designer and her assistant. And that distinction shapes the sadomasochistic relation between them and defines the way in which they love each other.